Well, thank you everyone for joining. This is our first live webinar that we're doing. Your security program has a blind spot, your insurers don't. What we're going to do today is we're going to do what is probably more like a format of a fireside chat. So that means we're not going to have any decks or slides or anything like that to show you. We're actually going to have a conversation. So let me go ahead and kick this off, set the stage, and then I'll introduce our distinguished panelist. One of the things that we've been looking at is compliance, and compliance used to be a main force in pulling cybersecurity budgets up the priority list, but that's shifted. Insurance is now driving the conversation in parallel, and in some industries, it's moving faster than regulators. S&P projects that the global cyber insurance market will hit $23 billion in premiums in 2026. Coalition's claims data shows 60% of cyber claims now stem from business email compromise and fund transfer fraud. International cyber rates have fallen 43% since late 2023, and S&P is now forecasting a 15 to 20% premium correction in 2026 as severity catches up. The market is repricing, the bar for getting covered is moving. So today's conversation is about what that means for mid-market companies and how to think about the total cost of carrying cyber risk rather than just cost of cyber tools. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our distinguished panel who will be answering some of my tough questions today. First is Devin Jones. He's our Chief Product Officer here at Cadence. Devin has over 25 years of experience scaling B2B technology companies from startups to enterprise. He has led product and operations teams at Cisco, Juniper Networks, and multiple high-growth startups, specializing in translating complex technologies into business results. And I can attest to that because he's a pretty cool Chief Product Officer. Devin is a published thought leader and has guided companies through significant revenue growth and successful exits. Welcome, Devin. Patrick, next is Patrick Hayes. He's a security strategist, speaker, and author. Patrick spent 30 years fixing the problems that fell between organizational silos. He is a strategist, speaker, and award-winning author of Integrated Assurance, Unified Risk Strategy, Can We Insure This? A CFO Guide to Cybersecurity, and the soon-to-be-released Relevant Impact, a field guide in integrated assurance. Patrick helps business owners reduce cyber risk before it becomes financial damage. Welcome, Patrick. And last is Daniel King. He's the CEO and founder of Secured Start. Daniel helps organizations secure their applications and reduce cybersecurity risk. With more than 25 years of experience in technology and security, he specializes in application security, penetration testing, and helping businesses build more secure software. So welcome, Daniel. I'm honored to be here with all of you. So our first question, I'm going to actually pose to Patrick. So this is really about, market context. So Patrick, you sit at the table with carriers and underwriters every week. For most of the last decade, regulation was the main force shaping how mid-market companies invested in security. That has changed. Carriers have started scanning environments, asking sharper questions, and walking away from accounts they cannot validate. From where you sit, what does the cyber insurance market actually look like heading into late 2026? And what should mid-market security and finance leaders understand about how underwriters are thinking right now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I think it's important to note that cybersecurity insurers or underwriters are no longer looking for questionnaires, they're looking for validation. So I think the message to most business owners, small, medium, and all the way up to large enterprise, is insurers are not asking if you're secure. They're asking if you can survive a disruption. That's really where the market is going. Compliance has always been a weak sign of overall risk management and security. It just means that you can actually implement controls, not necessarily successfully, and maybe not necessarily to the degree that's required. And so if you think about the insurance industry at its core, it's about transferring risk. So you're a business owner and you want to transfer the risk of a cyber attack or a cyber incident to an insurer that will provide you with compensation should an incident occur. Those insurers that have spent a number of years being burnt by a number of cyber attacks that were not properly addressed during the risk assessment of approving an application or underwriting coverage and whatnot. And now insurers are getting far smarter about that to say, it's one thing to say you have these tools. It's another thing to say that you use these tools, but can you actually recover from incidents that happen within your organization? So carriers are looking for evidence. They're not looking for your ability to fill out a questionnaire. They want to ensure that the risk that they're taking on for you as an organization is underwritable risk, which means they can price it and they can estimate what the potential claims loss would be for you as a customer.
Yeah, so evidence-based proof is what they're looking for now. There's no longer just a trust. There's a trust and verify happening here, or verify first, trust later.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so Devin, kind of picking up on what Patrick just laid out, companies have spent a decade building muscle around compliance, frameworks, audits, control mapping, the whole machine. But preparing for outsourced risk through insurance is a different exercise. It is not annual, it is continuous. It is not about the document, it is about what's actually running on the network at the moment the carrier looks. Where do you see the mid-market companies struggle most when they try to translate their compliance posture into something an underwriter will accept?
Thanks. That's a very important question. What I'm seeing in the conversations I'm having with mid-market companies is that they haven't fully grasped the shift that Patrick has just talked about. I think that it's going to take some time and a few companies to be in the position of a homeowner in Florida after a hurricane. They didn't really read the full cybersecurity insurance document, and they're not really certain of what is covered and what they are actually liable for moving forward. I think it was 2021 or 2023, I can't remember. There was a huge jump in premiums. I think it was something like 173% cost. And that was a shock to them, but they didn't fully understand it. The justification at the time was that the insurance, sure, they were insuring things without knowing what it actually cost, but they thought that was now stabilized and moving forward. To Patrick's point, they're starting to now actually look in and verify. And the mid-market companies are so accustomed to regulatory compliance, whichever markets they're in. And that is a very different thing than validation of effectiveness, which is that survivability, which Patrick talked about. I think it's going to take some time for that to sink in. Right now, I believe most mid-market companies are really in the compliance mode, but will move more closely to that survivability perspective that they need to have. They're not quite in the transition yet, I believe.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one, Devin. So Daniel, this lines up directly with what you see when you go into a test environment. Companies will hand you a stack of policies and a clean compliance report, and then the test starts and you find the gap between what is documented and what is actually deployed. When carriers stop accepting questionnaires at face value and want evidence of the controls, what changes for the buyer? That's question number one. What does prove it actually look like at the mid-market level? And how often does what you find on a test diverge from what the company believed about itself?
Great. Thank you for those questions. As Devin and Patrick already pointed out, we're seeing insurers asking companies to back up what they're saying, right? It's one thing to check a box that says MFA is enabled or vulnerabilities are being managed. It's another thing to provide evidence that those controls are actually working. And honestly, we find those gaps pretty regularly during our testing. And the thing is, it's not because these companies are trying to mislead anyone, but the thing is that environments change, exceptions get made, and things drift over time. And that's why insurers are putting more weight on independent validation and testing, such as penetration testing, than they were a few years ago.
Yeah, I can attest to that for sure. Having done this myself many years ago. Okay, so I'm going to just throw this out to all three of you. Most mid-market companies have security running monitoring tools. We all know that. We've all been there and seen it. Pen tester shows up once a year, maybe twice a year. Compliance handling, the insurance paperwork, and finance is paying the bills. Those four functions rarely talk to each other. The cost of that fragmentation is really invisible until a renewal comes back 40% higher or a claim gets denied. Patrick calls the alternative integrated assurance. What does that look like in practice for a 2,000 person company that doesn't have the headcount of a Fortune 500 company? And where do you start? What do you stop doing? So Patrick, you want to take the lead on that, and then we'll get Devin and Daniel's take?
Sure. So, as my bio indicates, I've spent the last 30 years living on the fray in between silos in organizations. So from very large telecoms and oil and gas companies to very small, 20-person startups. And typically the breakdown happens between everybody's understanding of an issue, let's call it risk for the purpose of this call, and their stakeholder participation in that risk or what's happening. So that's where the concept of integrated assurance came from. It's not a framework. It's not it's not a model for organizations to throw away other frameworks. What it is it's a model for everybody to use a common language, shared communication, so that my version of risk as the CFO is the same version of risk for the CIO, which is the same version of risk for the CEO. So we all understand that risk comes with an impact, and the impact is typically financial. And so we need to move away from things like measuring things on mean time to detect and bits and bytes and how fast is this and how fast was that, to if we lost access to our systems today, how long could we survive without those systems? Do we have manual processes to fall back on? Mm-hmm. Should we not have our logistic systems in place? How would we deal with our suppliers? These are things that then drive common language between shared stakeholders. And now we're starting to see a little bit more similar vision around risk and behavior that promotes the same shared accountability around the impact of loss.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, back in the day, I'm in Los Angeles, so we used to have practices around earthquakes, right? Especially when you're working in a large building and everybody had to be coordinated. It's very similar to that, or the old-fashioned kind of tabletop exercises that we all used to do in technology as well. Devin or Daniel, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. To Patrick's point, I'm a massive advocate of Patrick's model of integrated assurance. And the thing that it brings to a company, you had asked about a mid-market company around 2,000 people, I think. The biggest challenge that these companies have is time. And the thing that the integrated assurance model brings is a level of efficiency and understanding, that common language and that common understanding of risk, knowing what the interactions are going to be and engaging all of the stakeholders in a model that is an enterprise model of governance is massively time saving. So when that sustainability risk to the business happens, they can actually respond and recover very efficiently, and time is what they've gained. And that is their biggest risk of all.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, anything you want to add?
Not at this point.
Well,
Okay.
you know, Julie, I'd also say that from an insurability standpoint, when your underwriter sees that commonality around survivability and cost to the business, your risk profile drops for them because their view on your claims payouts, because that's really what they're measuring you against, right? The
Yeah.
financial impact to them paying out a claim for you. You now have that shared vision that continues on to these trusted partners that basically you're transferring your risk to, right? So they
Right.
see it in your behaviors, they see it in your technology, they see it in your actions. And you brought up, tabletop exercises in disaster recovery. I now call those survivability exercises, right? Because that's really what it is, especially
Yeah.
the smaller you are as a company. Your ability to survive is going to be the difference between what happens with your company and what happens with another company under the same incident.
Absolutely. And I think I don't want to misquote the statistics, but most smaller companies don't survive breaches just from the financial impact, right? And I think this also brings up a real point around accountability. I've been wanting to use that word since we started the session, and where that accountability lies within the organization. It really lies from all levels of it, right? Every C-level, every leader, and every individual is ultimately accountable. But I think that's a topic that I'll probably get into with you guys on another session. But it is something that keeps driving my inquiries in my mind as to where that accountability lies. So Devin, you made a point that security budgets used to be the first thing cut when finance went looking for savings, because the ROI math was hard to do. That's changing. The dollars on the insurance side plus the dollars on a denied claim or a 30 to 40% renewal jump are the kind of numbers a CFO pays attention to. How is that conversation actually landing with finance leaders right now? And then I'll go on to Patrick for a follow-up question with this one.
Yeah, I do believe that there's a shift in this space. In fact, I remember several years ago having a conversation with the CEO of a fairly large microchip company. And he said, look, when I need to cut budget, I go to IT because that's the biggest thing that I don't understand. And then the CIO goes to security because nobody really wants to pay security. They want to pay the least amount for it. It really wasn't tied to the business as clearly as it is today. As regulatory requirements started growing and now the insurance pieces are coming into play, it is becoming a strategic discussion budget-wise. They care very deeply about the regulatory requirements and meeting those needs in the markets they are, whether they're doing CMMC for supply chain into DoD, or they're in HIPAA, or they've got PCI issues, whatever it is crucial to their business and their ability to make revenue. Now, it's not just the regulatory approach, but it's also the insurability and the understanding of risk and how to offload that risk to a third party. The insurance company becomes crucial. So the conversations, I think, have only now started to be a little richer and deeper. And the CFO is gaining a greater understanding where, as I'd mentioned before, they don't want to be that homeowner in Florida after the hurricane. They're starting to read those insurance policies quite deeply and then having discussions about the implications. Before they would make assumptions and they were comfortable with that. Now they're actually having a partnership, having the discussions and getting a greater understanding of the meaning of the risk that they're maintaining their assumption of and outsourcing to the insurance companies.
Right. So Patrick, just a quick follow-up question on that. When carriers price renewals, how much of that number is now driven by what a CFO can or cannot demonstrate about the company's posture?
Well, let's start by being clear that the CFO doesn't want to be able to be the person that demonstrates that posture to an insurer, right? So I'll start by saying, like, the CFO they pay for cybersecurity, but what they really pay for is business interruption. That's their objective. It manifests itself as cybersecurity or security tools or IT tools or insurance coverage. The CFO is really there to manage and monitor the financial health of the business. And the biggest impact to the financial health of a business is interruption. When your business is interrupted, you're not making money. And so I remember earlier in my career when I was working with one company and it came time to actually kind of submit the paperwork around an assessment for their cybersecurity insurance policy. And the CFO went, "Oh shit, I got to talk to the IT guy now. Damn it. I'm not going to understand a damn thing that he's going to say." And that's a harsh reality because it shouldn't be a conversation around what is our firewall doing? Do we have security around our cloud environment? Do we have MFA in place? As the CFO, I pay for those things. But what I'm paying for is an outcome. And that outcome should be demonstrable to my insurer if I'm looking to transfer my risk so that we have some sort of, I don't want to call it a safety net because that's not really what it's meant to be. It's meant to be a mechanism, just like every other security mechanism, so that you can recover from bad things happening.
Right.
And so the CFO really, what they want is they want to be able to understand that the investment that they're making in their security and insurance program is the appropriate investment for your company to protect, defend, and recover from cyber incidents, because you can't protect from everything. It's difficult to defend from everything, and you have to recover from everything, because if you can't recover, now you're in serious trouble, right? Now you're in a position where you're no longer operating as a company. And how long does that really take? The larger the company, the more you can buffer that. The smaller the company, the shorter the runway, right?
Yeah.
Can you last 7 days? I think that's a tough question for most companies that are under 500 people. Can you last 7 days without access to your cash flow?
Yeah. Yeah. And also the brand damage that it does too, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think that's pretty evident. So let me kind of change this a little bit, Patrick, in kind of a looking forward point of view. International cyber rates have fallen 43% in the last 2 years. S&P is forecasting a 15 to 20% premium increase in 2026 because severity is catching up with prices. Combining ratios are deteriorating. Carriers are adding AI-specific underwriting questions. If you sit in a mid-market security or our risk leader down today and tell them to prepare for the next 18 to 24 months, what's on that list?
Well, definitely evidence to back up how you're submitting your application, because I can guarantee it 80% of insurers are scanning your environment, and there's a lot more data points and a lot more knowledge that's going into validating your application as it's coming in. It's one thing to hand over a paper that says, yes, we do have MDR, and yes, we do have MFA, and yes, we do have this. And for your vendor to come back and say, well, we've actually scanned your external environment and your attack surface looks like this to an attacker. Did you know that, right? Did you know that your DMARC for your email service is not secure and it makes you susceptible for email spoofing? Did you know that you're susceptible for business email compromise? Did you know that you're susceptible, based on the way that we can see your external attack surface, you're far more susceptible to financial transfer fraud, right? And the reality is I think most small, especially small, medium business owners, either they think they're too small, or they think that the answer is always ransomware. Well, we got to protect from ransomware. We got to protect from ransomware. Business email compromise is still the number one attack vector, because attackers don't want to use brute force. They want to use credentials. Right. They want to enter your environment in a pleasant way, right? And so when you think about that, I would always look to what are you using to attack, to protect your users? What are you doing to protect your core data? Because it's really what they're after. And it's a financial outcome that they're pursuing. The use of AI, right, is another one, right? What data does it have access to? Who has access to the data model for AI? Who can run prompts against it? And where do those prompts go, right? Who has access to those things? Underwriters are becoming very intelligent about that very quickly. It's not just about discovering vulnerabilities. It's about how you use it, who has access to it, and how can it be manipulated.
Right. Well, you covered a lot there, because I was just going to actually follow up and ask Daniel, where does that put pen testing? What changes in the cadence of pen testing, and, do the questions change? And it sounds like they do, especially when you're coming into, looking at the standards changing as well. Do you want to add to that, Daniel?
Yeah. So, pen testing, what's going to happen is it's going to shift from being a compliance exercise to a validation exercise. The cadence is going to become more continuous, and the focus will be on proving that critical controls, especially around identity and access, and as Patrick mentioned, these emerging AI risks are actually working and not just documented. And one thing that, with AI and the agents, penetration testing's no longer only going to be about testing software, but about testing behavior. And to reemphasize what Patrick said again, you need to treat AI like any other exposed system, where it's used, what tools and data it touches, and how it can be abused.
Yeah. Well, that's going to lead right into my next question for you, Daniel, because, a lot of companies ran digital transformation during the COVID era and still believe that their cloud provider absorbs most of that security accountability. The shared responsibility model says otherwise, and underwriters apparently know this. So when you go to test a hybrid environment, do you see that misunderstanding showing up in real exposure?
Absolutely. We see that misunderstanding all the time. This is because it's a failure to understand that shared responsibility model, right? So when organizations, they move to the cloud and they assume that provider is handling more security than they actually are. The reality is the cloud providers, they secure the infrastructure, basically the things that support those services that you're using. But the customer is still responsible for things like the identity, the access, all the configurations, data protection, and how their services are deployed, right? Because the cloud provider isn't going to know how you want a certain service or a certain piece configured, what data you want to protect. They don't know what part of your data is confidential or not. So from a testing perspective, the most common findings we see aren't usually vulnerabilities in the cloud provider. They're misconfigurations, excessive permissions, exposed assets, or identity related issues that fall squarely on the customer's responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what these insurers are paying attention to, because those are the things that lead to real world incidents. And I can tell you, when I was doing some pen testing for Amazon back in the day, that they went through and said, we have so many clients that aren't doing what they should for these configurations, that when you create a S3 bucket now, we're automatically going to make that private, not public, because so many companies were just leaving their stored data out on these buckets public. They were leaving their database open to the internet. So they started doing more of some secure by default standards that help move that for the customer.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Well, Devin, on the infrastructure side, where do you think mid-market teams most often misjudge what they actually own versus what their hyperscaler is covering?
Actually, Daniel mentioned all of them.
Yeah,
and it's true. They walk into this and they do assume that the provider is providing anything and everything around their thing, but they are focused on infrastructure work. I think, Daniel, I recall, I think you mentioned they don't do access, they don't do data security, they don't monitor, um, they don't own the keys and the decisions on the encryption. They don't own the control of the APIs. I remember the S3 buckets that they were by default public, and that was a massive problem for companies. In fact, I remember one that literally went out of business in about an hour because they owned the data. The other element as well, and we talked about this earlier, is AI as well. I think it was a few weeks ago I saw an interview with Qualcomm's CEO, and he was talking about the fact that now we also have to be worried about the AI agents. Our employees are finding amazing ways to increase their own personal efficiency. We encourage their personal efficiency, but now you can create AI agents that operate either in the AI provider's cloud, or you can bring it down to the desktop and create that. And what he had said was, you don't even know what AI agents you have going, and you don't know how they're working. So whether it's malicious or unintentional, it's irrelevant because there's almost no way to provide this. And Daniel had mentioned now you're looking at behavior. And that's exactly what they don't have in place today, typically. Some of them have some really good endpoint agent pieces that can look at behaviors on the endpoints, which is great. And others have less configured functionality that allows them to see those things. So that is going to be a major issue now and moving forward. And I think we're waking up to that very significantly.
Well, I think AI is definitely the wild card, and I think you must have read my questions because that's the next question I'm going to focus
Sorry.
on. And that,
I got
that is,
excited.
carriers are now adding AI-specific questions to underwriting submissions. You know, who manages that model? Who owns the data? What's the exposure if autonomous system leaks PII? I mean, which is, I think, what we're starting to see now. And on the attacker side, you know, AI is making phishing and BEC dramatically more convincing, which is showing up in claims data. Coalition has about 60% of claims now coming from business email compromise. So there is this AI dimension side of the policy. What should mid-markets companies start doing right now to get in front of that? I mean, they're already behind it, right? If they're not in front of it already, in my opinion, before that cyber insurance questionnaire even shows up, for them to start answering it, because I think this is where we're going to start seeing tougher and tougher questions.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm going to take a jump
was
on
open
that
to
one
all of you.
because, yeah. So I had a really interesting conversation with a good friend the other day where, he said, so what is the difference between cloud transformation and AI, right? Or any other transformation that we've gone through over the years? And I said, well, AI is not infrastructure, it's decision making. So you're not moving your infrastructure from on-prem or hybrid or what have you to a cloud-based infrastructure. You're moving your decision-making capability from humans to machine, to a set of criteria. And the one thing that does, right, unlike infrastructure, is it exposes weaknesses far faster. So if you had poor decision-making capability before, it's going to be amplified, right? Because now you're training a machine to make poor decisions faster, or you're accepting decisions that you're just assuming are true. Like we've spent so long teaching everybody that technology should be trusted, and now we've got to spend the next 5 years teaching them not to trust technology, right? Like, I mean, it's almost irony, right? Even this morning, right? Anthropic just announced, hey, we're going to make Mythos AI available for everybody. Well, wait a second. You just said it's too dangerous for everybody. Then you made a press release saying maybe let's take a pause on AI because it can build itself. And then they went down the path of every technology company in history, and they went, nah, ship it anyways. Let's make some, and good luck to you all, right? And here's where we are. Insurers are looking at this and they're saying, okay, so how responsible are you in your use and deployment of AI? Is it actually in a position to accelerate risks within your environment, or are you using it in a responsible fashion that won't expose your data, still hold some level of human accountability, and that there is some sort of governance that oversees this? And and that needs to be transparent. You can't just say, I don't know how AI got to that conclusion, right? That's just not an acceptable answer, right?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely need some guardrails put around, treat it like, I think we had talked about this previously, or maybe I was at a
Yeah.
thought leadership dinner a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about this exact thing around resilience in the age of AI. And, it really needs to be treated like a rogue employee in some way. Because now it's on your, it's a function of your company.
Well,
And
I mean, it's an attack surface, Julie,
yeah,
right? It's not
it
just a
is.
rogue employee. AI is a brand new attack surface.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the issues that I see is we don't have the tools to really monitor the activity that's going on. And a couple of weeks ago, I saw this brilliant guy out of Calgary. I met him in Vancouver, and he was showing me his control within his organization that showed how he is allowing his people specific MCPs, and he's monitoring the use of MCPs and filtering certain commands of the MCPs. So that limits, for people who aren't wildly dorky, the MCP allows the AI to actually use API commands into other applications. So I love your description. We're now doing a transformation of decision making. That's exactly true. And the MCP is what enables the decision makers make decisions of AI to be executed throughout the different systems. So he's controlling how AI can actually make decisions and then execute on them through filters and monitoring that. And I think those kinds of controls, which don't really exist in the market, this was a completely home baked thing. I thought it was brilliant. And we're going to start seeing more of that. So we're going to start learning how to control. And Patrick, I'm going to steal that because I love it. The transformation of decision. That's brilliant.
I'm going to steal it too. We're just going to steal it, Patrick. So don't try to use it in one of your next books or anything like that, because we're going to take it.
It's not trademarked. Yeah, it's not
Okay.
trademarked yet. But
All right. So I want to just say we're at time. We'd started a little bit late because we had some issues with the URL getting into the meeting, and we apologize for everybody, but this recording will be available. We do want to open it up for Q&A. We'll open for the next 5 minutes, and if there are no active questions, we have a couple questions that we had asked participants prior to the start of this, so we'll use some of those questions as well. So let's just, if there's Q&A, you can go into the Q&A panel and add your question now. And by the way, while we're doing that, I realized I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of the event. And my name is Julie Case, and I am the CEO and founder of Cadence. And I've been in the IT operations sector for 25 years of my career. I've run large data centers, managed things. I have actually handled all of the issues we're talking about on this call today. So very familiar with them. All right, looks like we've got our first question. Where did that question come? I saw a question. Oh, it's in chat. Do you see, so Mike Sumner asked, do you see MSP being ready to address the shift to decision making?
That's a quick answer. No.
So I think it depends, right? Devin's favorite answer for me is always it depends. Managed service providers, right, which typically provide outsourced IT services for smaller organizations, they're really absorbing the shift and the shock from insurers right now, because where the validation really, with the rubber hits the road, usually comes together with the MSP if you're a small organization. Are your vulnerabilities present? What's your path to remediate them? Are security controls in place? What's your path to monitoring them? What happens? What's your role in that shared responsibility model for recovery with smaller organizations? Now, what role does the MSP play in the implementation, rollout, management, monitoring of AI? Right now, absolutely none, unless they introduce it themselves on their side, right? So I think we just need to be very careful, because if I'm a small business and I sign an agreement with an MSP, that service level agreement doesn't cascade into the AI that the service provider, the MSP, deploys on their side. So if I suddenly have a team that's doing help desk and the first level of help desk is triaged by an AI agent, right? And it makes a mistake, that cascades directly over to the business owner that's signed that contract and that responsibility with that MSP. So there's a lot of gray area right now in what role does an MSP play with the organizations that they provide support to, right? Did the organization sign up for the AI efficiencies that you're implementing to manage staff reductions or increase productivity or whatever it is? And what do they have from a remediation standpoint or from a recovery standpoint if something happens from you on the MSP side? And sorry, Michael, if I'm not answering that the way that you're asking it, the reality is that shared responsibility model needs to be looked at closer. If you're outsourcing your service, look at your SLAs and understand really what your MSP is providing to you and what you're on the hook for, right? Don't just look at limitations to liability and the warranties. Look at what role they play, because they are actually playing a role that it should exist within your company. But from a financial standpoint, it exists with you because you have the competency and you're providing the service. Insurers are going to look at that, right? It's going to be problematic for MSPs if it isn't already, in terms of how well are you guarding your customers and how well can they recover from situations, AI or not.
Okay, thank you. Great question, great answer. Any more questions? Otherwise, I'm going to probably take one of the questions that we had before the session started, that we asked our participants to submit. So I want to kind of go on the heels of what you just said.
Hey,
and
Julie,
yeah.
before you start on that, Mike actually had a follow-up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, no, it's okay. He
There
said
we go.
great answer. Do you have any thoughts on how MSPs can be ready for the shift and the general demonstrability?
Excellent.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to take a little stab at it, and I think that Devin and Daniel also have a take on this too, because both of them have lived in that side of the world as well, right? You need to, first of all, you need to review your contracts that you're sharing with your customers and your SLAs, and make sure that it is a true reflection of the responsibility that you're sharing and what you are managing for your customer and on their behalf. There are going to be more immediate demands to make sure that those things are in good shape, using plain language, free from vulnerabilities, emails being monitored, so that business email compromised is minimized, ensuring that customers had some level of security awareness training and whatnot, so that they don't continue to be an increased attack vector. But yeah, I would look at your SLAs, I'd look at the shared responsibility model and understand the role that you play, because when it comes to the insurer looking at the organization, you're going to be part of that view. You're in scope. And what responsibility do you have on behalf of the customer to make sure that you're not inadvertently creating an attack surface for them to be compromised?
Yeah, the only thing I can add, because it is a general response, but it's looking deeply at the decision-making architecture, and to Patrick's point, making sure you understand what areas you play and what you're contractually obligated to. But that decision-making architecture, and we got into the decision discussion because the decision transformation with AI, then it's actually looking at the AI architecture and what is intended there. Unfortunately, a lot of companies have CEOs that came in and say, we need AI. And the people look at them blankly like, okay, what do you mean? Others come at it more thoughtfully and say, how can we use AI to improve the business? Where are the best possible areas to increase that efficiency? And then build into it the risk approach and how we'll manage that. And if the MSP is engaged, or at least understands that, has a much better ability to align and execute with them.
I'd add to that, as you're adopting AI and these MSPs, make sure you're doing it safely and securely. Because one thing you need to consider is that all the risk that you're taking on, you're basically passing that on to your clients, and they're default accepting it because they don't know what you're doing inside your corporation or your company by bringing in AI. And so anything that happens to you is automatically possibly going to be passed down to them as well. So again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, inventory, what AI you have. There's technology out there that can tell you what AI are being used within your company, right? There's a company that uses like a DNS type of filtering, looking at what, are using ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever it is you're using, right? And as Devin mentioned earlier, there are these MCP servers, and those are basically just sets of APIs. So if you have some company has a product, it's not AI enabled already. What they've done is they've bolted on these APIs to allow AI to talk to that. And then, so you can also have rogue MCP servers, right? Also, these servers and these AIs are using skills. And so how I kind of relate of what skills are is like in the old days with software, companies didn't write all their own software. They brought in lots of open source dependencies, and that created lots of risk and vulnerabilities for them. Now they're doing the same thing with AI by going out and finding skills. So you have developers that are just looking for the new hot skill that's out, and they're bringing it on in, and they have maybe no idea what that skill is really doing unless someone takes the time to review that code, look at what access it has and what tools it's using. So really it goes back to basic security fundamentals. Everyone wants to always get these expensive tools and do all these crazy things, and really we just got to go back to basic security fundamentals. Least privilege, privileged access, right? What do you have access to? What is it doing? And going back to what Devin said earlier, with AI, a lot of these companies are going to come back and be asked when things do go wrong, where's your logging, monitoring, and auditing of what those AI systems have done?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That kind of goes back to treating it as an extension of your staff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's one real exception though, and that is, and I caution anybody that's looking down the path of AI SOC, for example, like AI Security Operations Center. AI and large language models have proven to be very good with deterministic logic, right? Rules-based outcomes. As soon as you get into the world of probabilistic, you start introducing things like AI wants to please its users. AI will select the next word in the outcome based on a probabilistic choice of, if there's 10 answers, 7 are good and 3 are wild ass weird, there's a 3 in 10 chance that one of those next answers might come out wrong, right? So until AI is better with probabilistic logic, like keep it to deterministic, keep it to rules-based outcomes that you can actually expedite in the decision-making process. Otherwise, you're just introducing more and more risk.
Thank you. So on that, we're at time. This has been a great discussion. I have to drop it soon. Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate you joining us. Thanks for everybody who joined us today. And I want to say thank you to Devin and Patrick and Daniel for sharing their expertise in this webinar. We hope everybody did get something out of it. The recording will be available to all of those that couldn't attend. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.